What if I told you, like seriously, lean in for this one, that one of the countries people usually clown on, brush aside, or straight up ignore in global economics just pulled off something wild? And I'm talking big wild. Like, did that really just happen? Wild. Burkina Faso, yeah, that Burkina Faso, the landlocked West African nation most Western analysts describe with depressing buzzwords like poor, unstable, or dependent, just paid off nearly $5 billion in domestic debt, without the IMF, without the World Bank, and without a single Western bailout. I know, right? Like, what? Haha, it sounds like a plot twist from some political thriller. But no, it's real life. This country, often talked about like it's too fragile to even stand up straight, just kicked the door open and yelled, "We good. We got this." Ah man, the confidence is insane. And honestly, this wasn't just a financial decision. This was a whole attitude, a whole vibe, a whole don't play with us energy shift. See, for decades, Western narratives made it sound like Africa needs big daddy institutions, the IMF, the World Bank, Paris, Washington. Like Africa is some kid who can't tie its shoes without help. But then here comes Burkina Faso under President Ibrahim Traoré, stepping onto the global stage like, nah, we'll tie our own shoes. And watch, we might even run. And boom, they did. In early 2024, the world got hit with a headline that made economists choke on their coffee. Prime Minister Apollinaire Kailam Tambela stood up and basically dropped a mic-sized announcement. Burkina Faso has paid $4.79 billion in domestic debt, all of it, using only internal resources. Bruh, you could hear the silence in Western capitals from space. No IMF intervention. No terms and conditions apply loans. No Western watchdog breathing down their necks. Just straight up homegrown problem solving. This wasn't some please help us fundraiser. There were no sad charity acts. No GoFundMe diplomacy like, hey Paris, got a minute? Instead, what happened was quiet strength, planning, discipline. The kind of resilience people underestimate because they mistake calm for weakness. The world expected chaos, collapse, panic. Instead, Burkina Faso wrote a whole new rulebook. And yo, people noticed. Not because the number was the biggest ever, it wasn't, but because of who did it and how they did it. This was the political version of someone everyone doubted standing up one day and saying, I'm done with excuses, and then actually meaning it. And it worked. This move told the entire international community, we don't play by your rules anymore. Dang, talk about a power move. What Burkina Faso did wasn't just about money. It was about dignity, sovereignty, a whole country looking in the mirror and saying, we're done being someone else's project. And whether the world liked it or not, they had to listen. Because suddenly, a new Africa wasn't some dream people joked about. It felt real. It felt alive. And it felt loud. But hold up, how did a country under sanctions, with security threats, and a struggling economy pull off a flex this massive? The real story behind the strategy is even crazier. And trust me, you're not ready for what comes next. How Burkina Faso pulled off the impossible. The secret strategy nobody expected. All right, buckle up, because this part right here, it's where things go from, wow to bro, no way they really did that. So after Burkina Faso shocked the world with that nearly $5 billion debt repayment announcement, the big question everyone, like literally everyone, started whispering was, how the heck did they do it? I mean, come on. A country dealing with security threats, sanctions, political pressure, and a whole bunch of Western side-eye somehow managed this miracle. Haha, the math ain't mathing for Western analysts, and it shows. But here's the part that hits different. Burkina Faso didn't do it with magic. They did it with courage, clarity, and a little something the West seriously underestimated. National pride. Yup. Aw, I know that sounds warm and fuzzy, but don't get it twisted. This wasn't some motivational poster moment. This was strategy, baby. Traoré's bold move, President Ibrahim Traoré, the young firebrand that some Western media loved to misunderstand, made a decision that felt like it came straight from a revolutionary playbook. Instead of begging foreign lenders for lifelines and getting tied up in a million strings, he said, let's bet on our own people. Dang, that's leadership with backbone. They issued domestic bonds, not to the World Bank, not to Paris, not to London. No, these bonds were offered to local banks, pension funds, businesses, regular Burkina Faso citizens. Yes, sir. Everyday folks were invited into the future of their own country. That's wild. That's bold. That's different. And at first, people were like, are y'all serious? Because Burkina Faso wasn't exactly living in sunshine and rainbows. There were insurgent attacks, economic pressure, political uncertainty. Most experts predicted investors would run like someone yelled fire. But, plot twist, they didn't RUN. They stayed, and then they invested, and then they invested more. Why? Because for the first time in a long, long time, the people actually trusted their leaders. I know, shocking, right? Here's the magic ingredient. Trust. See, when the government isn't constantly bending over backwards to please foreign donors, they actually start listening to their own citizens. Crazy idea, huh? Traoré's administration showed fiscal discipline, transparency, real plans for infrastructure, real accountability. And Burkina Faso people looked around like, dang, maybe this time our money is actually going somewhere real. It wasn't charity. It wasn't blind patriotism. It was hope wrapped in financial realism. Roads, schools, hospitals, security, agriculture, development. People could see the plan. And what do humans do when they believe in a plan? They ride for it. Hard. This whole movement flipped the script completely. Instead of relying on outsiders, Burkina Faso said, we trust our own hands more than foreign pockets. And that message hit home. Western institutions kept waiting for collapse, waiting for panic, waiting for, I told you so. Instead, Burkina Faso became a case study in self-belief. A whole nation saying, we're done depending on other folks to save us. Dang, what a vibe. But don't think the outside world was cheering. Oh no. When Burkina Faso pulled this off, some very powerful players got uncomfortable. Next up, we dive into the backlash, the pressure, and the whispered accusations that followed. And trust me, it gets wild. The world reacts, suspicion, pressure, and the panic behind closed doors. Because once Burkina Faso pulled the "we paid off billions without you" stunt, the reaction from the global financial world wasn't applause. No, it was more like, excuse me? Who told you could do that? I swear, the silence from the IMF and Western capitals was so loud you could practically hear the awkward coughing. Instead of celebrating, the West got suspicious. Let's keep it 100 here. The global financial system isn't built to encourage independence. It's built to make countries feel like they always need advice and assistance from the same institutions that loan them money with interest rates higher than your favorite rapper's chain price. So when Burkina Faso suddenly pays off nearly $5 billion without IMF loans, without World Bank oversight, with zero Western training wheels, it sent shockwaves, like actual shockwaves. Analysts were scrambling. Think tanks were confused. Economists were looking at spreadsheets like, someone check the math, bro. A tiny, landlocked, sanctioned country basically walked into the world's biggest financial club and said, hey, we don't need y'all anymore. And the room went silent. Behind closed doors, the whisper started. Is Russia helping them? Is China providing secret financing? There must be a hidden hand. No one, literally no one, believed that an African nation could succeed using its own resources and trust in its own people. Ah, the disrespect is crazy. But here's the funny part. There was no secret, no puppet master, no hidden sponsor. Just Burkina Faso doing Burkina Faso. And that's exactly what freaked out the old financial system. Then came the backlash. When you break rules that were never meant to be broken, the rule makers don't clap, they tighten the screws. Burkina Faso suddenly faced sanction, reduced aid packages, diplomatic cold shoulders, security concerns magically popping up, suspicious media coverage, invitations to economic forums disappearing. Western media switched from interesting development to this might be too radical. This is dangerous economic nationalism. This model is unsustainable. Bruh. The switch up was quick, but let's be real. The fear wasn't that Burkina Faso would fail. The fear was that Burkina Faso might succeed and inspire others. Because if one country proves the system isn't necessary, then suddenly the whole system starts looking optional. And oh boy, nobody in power wants to look optional. Traoré didn't flinch. While the West applied pressure, Traoré stayed calm, cool, and collected, like that one dude in a heist movie who sips coffee while alarms ring everywhere. He didn't lash out. He didn't beg. He didn't panic. He just said, "We don't need permission to stand on our own feet." Oof. That line probably broke a few diplomatic hearts in Washington and Paris. The real threat. Burkina Faso exposed something the West never wanted highlighted. Maybe Africa isn't dependent. Maybe Africa was just never allowed to be independent. Dang. Let that sink in. But hold up. Because once the news of Burkina Faso's massive financial flex spread across Africa, something even more unexpected happened. A ripple effect, a spark, a movement. Africa wakes up. The ripple effect nobody saw coming. Faso's victory, and turns into something way bigger, like continental big. When Burkina Faso flexed its financial independence, Africa didn't just watch. Africa felt it. And yo, the reaction. Hugh, imagine lighting a small match in a dark room and suddenly realizing the whole place is filled with fireworks. That's exactly what happened. Other African countries started paying attention. First came Burkina Faso's closest brothers in the struggle, Mali and Niger. These two nations, dealing with their own transitions and pushing back against external pressure, looked at Burkina Faso and went, "Dang, wait a second. If they can pull this off, why can't we?" And boom, that's when the quiet conversations began. African economists, policy experts, and young reformers from Ghana, Kenya, Ethiopia, South Africa, Senegal, started referencing what they now call the Burkina model. Haha, can you imagine? A tiny country that Western analysts barely mention suddenly becomes the blueprint for financial sovereignty. Oh man, that had to sting for a few people in high places. Pan-African unity sparks up. And then something even cooler happened. People started talking. Not politicians, not bankers, not think tank elites. THE youth. African youth, from Lagos to Nairobi, from Accra to Johannesburg, started jumping on TikTok, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube saying things like, "Yo, Traoré isn't just a leader. He's a whole vibe." Finally, an African president who acts like a big brother, not a puppet. Ibrahim Traoré is proof Africa can stand tall. Haha, the memes were wild. People were editing Traoré into superhero posters, anime scenes, warrior outfits, everything. When the people ride for you like that, you've officially leveled up. Diaspora energy goes crazy. And don't even get me started on the African diaspora. African Americans, Caribbeans, Afro-Latinos, Black Europeans, everyone was suddenly like, "Hold up. Africa's changing, and for real this time. Webinars, forums, fundraising groups, and think tanks started forming in New York, Chicago, Toronto, London, Paris, Amsterdam. The vibe switched from Africa needs help to Africa is rising, and we want to be part of it. Oh, man, that pride, that connection, it was beautiful. Even Washington noticed. Behind the scenes, you had U.S. diplomats low-key sweating like, guys, what exactly is happening over there? The State Department quietly asked African partners questions like, is Traoré trustworthy? Is he working with Russia or China? How did he do this without us? But here's the kicker. Their real fear wasn't that Burkina Faso was influenced by other powers. Their fear was, he didn't need A and Y powers. He just did it, with no foreign strings. Dang, that alone could rewrite the rules. A shift in global power. Suddenly big Western think tanks like the Council on Foreign Relations, Brookings Institution, Chatham House, started dropping concerned reports with titles like Burkina Faso's Sovereign Gamble, The Rise of Independent Financing in the Sahel, Is IMF Influence Shrinking? Translation, they were panicking without saying, we're panicking. The old world order could feel the ground shaking under its feet. But trust me, this is just the build-up. Because once the West realized this wasn't a fluke, the pressure shifted from quiet suspicion to outright geopolitical chess moves. Global chess moves, pressure, sanctions, and quiet panic. Because once Burkina Faso proved it could pay off $4.79 billion with domestic resources, the world didn't just blink. Oh no. They started moving pieces on the board like a high-stakes chess game. Western powers, IMF bigwigs, and policy think tanks were suddenly having serious private panic sessions. You know that moment when someone walks into a meeting and the whole room goes quiet because nobody expected the play? That was them. Dang. Sanctions and subtle sabotage. The reaction wasn't overtly hostile at first. Oh no, that would have been too obvious. Instead, Burkina Faso started facing a quiet siege. Trade benefits got suspended. Visa restrictions popped up for officials. Funding from foreign investors quietly pulled. Invitations to major economic forums disappeared. Western media coverage went from wow, impressive to risky populist experiment real quick. You could almost hear the eye rolls through the satellite feeds. Ha ha ha. Ouch. The message was clear. You can try to succeed, but don't think you can do it without us. Analysts scrambled. Economists in London, Washington, and Paris were scribbling like crazy. Can this really last? Are they secretly backed by China or Russia? What about inflation? Default? Collateral damage? Funny thing? None of these fears materialized. Zip, nada, zilch. Instead, Burkina Faso's economy kept stabilizing. Inflation stayed manageable, GDP rose steadily, and local currency usage increased in rural regions. Talk about flipping the script, and the world scrambling. It was like watching someone beat the house at its own game, and the dealers weren't used to losing. Traoré stands firm. Even with all this quiet pressure, President Ibrahim Traoré remained calm, steady, and unshaken. He wasn't confrontational. He wasn't seeking drama. He was just confident. And honestly, that confidence rubbed off on the citizens. He'd say things like, we are not anti-West. We are pro-dignity. Boom. Mic drop. The West didn't know how to respond because results speak louder than threats. Africa noticed it. Meanwhile, across the continent, the story sparked conversations everywhere. Could Mali follow suit? Could Ghana, Kenya, or Ethiopia start considering their own independence from IMF loans? Could this be the start of a financial reawakening in Africa? The old narrative that African nations must kneel to foreign lenders suddenly began to crack. The youth? Oh, they were cheering louder than ever on social media. Traoré became a symbol of bold, homegrown leadership, civil society energy. Not just governments, but ordinary citizens and diaspora communities joined the wave. Webinars, think tanks, and grassroots campaigns started forming across the US, Europe, and Africa itself. The message was clear. Africa doesn't need to ask permission to rise. And guess what? That ripple was turning into a wave, a movement, a vibe. But hold up, because the West wasn't going to sit back forever. The next part is where the real pressure cooker moments happen. Sanctions tighten, whispers of hidden support fly around, and the stakes go from economic to geopolitical. Pressure cooker, sanctions, suspicion, and the stakes rise. Because Burkina Faso's bold move didn't just ruffle feathers. It sent shockwaves through corridors of power in Europe, Washington, and even Asia. Haha, picture a bunch of economists sweating bullets because a country they underestimated just pulled a stunt they didn't see coming. Yeah, that was the vibe. Sanctions and subtle pressure. Once the news hit that Burkina Faso cleared $4.79 billion in domestic debt without Western loans, sanctions quietly started piling up. Not flashy, not loud, just enough to make the country's neighbors and partners nervous. Visa restrictions, reduced trade benefits, limited access to international forums, all subtle moves to pressure the government into submission. Western media started spinning narratives. Risky populist experiment. Dangerous economic nationalism. Potential inflationary time bomb. Bro, it's like they were trying to scare the nation into compliance without anyone noticing. Haha, oof. Accusations fly. And yo, you can bet the whispers started. Are they secretly getting help from Russia? China must be involved somewhere, right? How did they do it without IMF supervision? But here's the kicker. There was no hidden hand, no secret loans, no puppet master. Just Burkina Faso, its people, and a bold plan executed with discipline and trust. Dang. That must have hurt a few egos in DC and Brussels. The power of trust. What made this work wasn't some financial trick. It was trust. The government showed fiscal responsibility, transparency, and clear plans for development. Citizens, banks, pension funds, they all bought in. They weren't just giving money. They were investing in schools, roads, hospitals, and the future of their own country. Ah, talk about people power. And when you have people believing in the vision, even amidst conflict, that's stronger than any loan agreement, stronger than any IMF condition. A geopolitical chess game. Western powers quickly realized the stakes. If Burkina Faso succeeds without foreign aid, what message does that send to other African nations? It's a domino effect waiting to happen. Mali might follow. Niger could replicate the strategy. Ghana, Kenya, South Africa, all watching closely. And the big fear? Loss of control. Not over money, not over economics, but over influence. That's the real game here. Traoré stays unshaken, while whispers, sanctions, and suspicions swirled. Traoré didn't panic. He didn't lash out. He didn't beg. He simply stood his ground, calm and measured. We don't need permission to stand on our own feet. Boom. Mic drop. The West wanted submission. They got confidence. Ha ha ha. Love it. Civil society and diaspora rise. Meanwhile, ordinary citizens across Africa and the diaspora were losing it in the best way. Social media lit up. Memes, videos, commentary, hashtags, celebrating Burkina Faso as a symbol of independence and courage. And yo, that energy wasn't just for show. Webinars, think tanks, and youth movements started popping up in the US, Europe, and Africa itself. all inspired by this one bold act. This was bigger than finance. This was a philosophical wake-up call. But here's the kicker. The West wasn't done. How Burkina Faso's success started shaking global institutions and why even the IMF ended up reaching out, quietly, but in a way that no one expected. The unexpected proposal. In early 2025, the IMF approached Ouagadougou, Burkina Faso's capital, with a cooperation proposal, not a demand, not an enforcement plan, but a bilateral dialogue. Think about that for a second. The institution that once dictated austerity, structural reforms, and privatization suddenly said, hey, maybe we can talk. Whoa, dang. That's a huge shift. Why now? Because Burkina Faso's numbers didn't lie. GDP stabilized. Inflation dropped below 6%. Local currency usage rose over 40% in rural regions. Agricultural output exceeded projections. Youth unemployment fell for the first time in a decade. Can you blame them for being impressed? You gotta respect results. Traoré's response. When the IMF's request landed, Traoré didn't jump or panic. He didn't grovel. He replied with 3 simple words. We will listen. Ooh, feel that. Not submission. Not surrender. Strength, confidence, control. For the first time, the conversation was happening on Burkina Faso's terms. Oh man, that's leadership 101. Global ripple effect. This move didn't just shock the IMF. It got African leaders, economists, and activists buzzing across the continent. Think tanks in Ghana, Kenya, and South Africa started running simulations based on the Burkina model. Pan-African forums began discussing sovereignty not as rebellion, but as responsibility. African youth online exploded with pride and hope, sharing the story across TikTok, Instagram, and YouTube. Memes were flying like wildfire. And let's be real, it felt like the start of a continental wake-up call. Vision beyond debt. Traoré's government didn't just stop at we repaid our debt. He used this momentum strategically. Regional cooperation. Investment in local markets. Education initiatives. Youth empowerment programs. No empty slogans here. Actual blueprints rooted in real-life experience. Dang. Talk about turning a financial win into a full-scale social movement. West's cautious admiration. Even some Western politicians, while publicly skeptical, began to quietly admire Traoré's courage. Because here's the truth. Africa's future might just lie in leaders who embrace self-reliance instead of dependence. And that's exactly what Burkina Faso became. A symbol of African self-determination. The stage was set. Traoré wasn't just a national leader anymore. He was a continental beacon, inspiring millions to rethink what independence could look like. But wait, the story doesn't stop there. How Burkina Faso's rise is changing global economic calculations, inspiring other nations across Africa and even Latin America. And why this is only the beginning of a seismic shift. Because what Burkina Faso started as a bold financial move didn't just stay in West Africa. It rippled across continents. Like throwing a stone into a pond and watching waves crash everywhere. Africa takes notice. From Mali to Niger, from Ghana to Ethiopia. African nations started asking the same question. If Burkina Faso can do it, why can't we? The old narrative that African nations must kneel to foreign lenders began cracking. Young leaders and reformers started studying Burkina Faso's model. Local capital mobilization, trust building, and disciplined governance. Even civil society got in on it. Across Africa. Grassroots campaigns promoting financial independence. Social media movements calling for homegrown solutions. Youth-led webinars exploring alternatives to IMF and World Bank loans. The energy was contagious. Hope was back. Global admiration and curiosity. Meanwhile, across the world, economists in Latin America, Bolivia, Argentina referenced the Burkina model as proof small nations can challenge global financial orthodoxy. Academics in Southeast Asia, Indonesia, Malaysia revisited post-colonial economic strategies. Even European fringe groups on the left and right cited Burkina Faso's independence as a challenge to centralized control. Dang, a small landlocked nation just became a global symbol of financial courage. Traoré as a visionary. President Ibrahim Traoré was no longer just a national figure. He became a continental icon, proof that bold, disciplined, homegrown leadership could produce real results. Instead of confrontation, Traoré promoted unity and empowerment. Regional financial cooperation. Investments in local markets. Education initiative. Youth and women empowerment. Not slogans. Real, actionable blueprints. Western powers were left in awe, and maybe a little jealous. They realized that this wasn't a fleeting success. This was a sustainable model, one that could be replicated across Africa if other nations had the courage to follow. The psychological shift. Here's the kicker. Burkina Faso didn't just repay debt. It changed the mindset of an entire continent. Sovereignty was no longer just a flag or a border. It became budgets, loans, investment decisions, strategic independence. Young Africans educated abroad started returning with local blueprints, not Western templates. And the diaspora? They mobilized, connected, and amplified the story of Burkina Faso everywhere, from New York to Paris to London. A new chapter begins. Global investors began reassessing risks in the Sahel. International institutions acknowledged the rise of sovereign financing. African leaders were watching, learning, and planning. And one truth became clear. This was no longer just about Burkina Faso. This was about the global South claiming its voice in policy, in finance, and in destiny. Traoré wasn't just surviving. He was setting the rules. How Burkina Faso's success forced the IMF to approach negotiations on African terms, and why this is reshaping global economic power dynamics forever. Redefining global power. The IMF bends and the world watches, because after all the shocks, sanctions, and admiration, the IMF finally made the move. Can you imagine the scene? Analysts in Washington nervously whispering, Do we ask them to cooperate? Yeah. The same IMF that once demanded austerity, structural reforms, and privatizations from African nations quietly extended a hand of cooperation to Burkina Faso. The conversation changes. For decades, the narrative was simple. Africa needs supervision. Africa needs foreign loans. Africa must comply with Western conditions. But Burkina Faso said, Nah, we got this. And the world had to listen. Traoré's reply was measured, calm, and perfectly strategic. We will listen. Mic drop. Not surrender. Not compromise. Strength. Sovereignty. Leadership. This wasn't just a statement. It was a reversal of roles. For the first time, global financial institutions were negotiating on African terms, not the other way around. Impact across continents. Burkina Faso's success didn't stay local. It started inspiring global reflection. Latin America. Economists in Bolivia and Argentina cited the Burkina model as proof small nations could defy global financial norms. Southeast Asia. Scholars in Indonesia and Malaysia revisited post-colonial economic theories, questioning the dependence on Western-dominated financial structures. Europe. Fringe and mainstream voices alike debated the implications of a sovereign African nation successfully asserting financial independence. And in Africa, Pan-African forums buzzed with one repeated thought: if Burkina Faso can do it, why not us? Traoré as a continental beacon. Traoré wasn't just leading a country anymore. He had become a symbol of African resilience and self-determination. Civil society mobilized. Diaspora communities amplified the story. Youth movements shared strategies for independence and development. The narrative had shifted. Africa could rise on its own terms, and Burkina Faso was proof. Western recalibration. Even Western policymakers had to recalibrate. Quiet intelligence reports, think tank analyses, and policy briefings began circulating. Burkina Faso's model is sustainable. Could it inspire other nations? How do we maintain influence if countries refuse loans and conditions? Haha. You know that panic behind polished smiles? Yeah, it was real. And the fear wasn't military. It wasn't ideological. It was financial independence. The tiny landlocked nation had exposed a systemic vulnerability. Decades of Western control relied on dependence, not success. How Burkina Faso became a symbol of African self-reliance, inspiring not just nations, but a whole generation, and reshaping global power dynamics forever. Burkina Faso becomes a symbol, Africa's new dawn. This is where we see Burkina Faso's story go from national triumph to continental inspiration. Haha, you feel me? Buckle up. Africa wakes up. After paying off nearly $5 billion in debt without any Western aid, Burkina Faso didn't just change its own destiny. It shifted the mindset of an entire continent. From Addis Ababa to Lagos, young Africans were talking. If Burkina Faso can stand on its own, so can we. We don't need permission to be free. Self-reliance is power. The old belief that the IMF was the only path to stability began cracking. And guess what? Africa's youth, often educated abroad, were returning with local blueprints, not Western templates. Can you feel the vibe? The energy? That hope? That's real change. Traoré's leadership becomes legendary. President Ibrahim Traoré wasn't just a leader anymore. He became a continental beacon. He didn't fight with aggression. He fought with discipline, vision, and results. Through his leadership, local capital markets were mobilized. Infrastructure projects flourished. Youth and women empowerment became strategic priorities. Regional financial cooperation discussions gained momentum. Every step reinforced a message: Africa can lead on its own terms. I love this part because results speak louder than threats. Global recalibration. Burkina Faso's independence forced global institutions to rethink their strategies. IMF quietly approached for cooperation instead of enforcement. Western think tanks analyzed the model behind closed doors. Policy discussions globally began, including Africa as an equal, not a subject. Dang. A landlocked, once overlooked nation just rewrote the rules of engagement in international finance. Civil society and diaspora amplify the story. And let's not forget the people. Across Africa and in the diaspora. Social media campaigns celebrated Traoré's bold moves. Webinars, discussions, and forums started exploring alternative African development paths. Pan-African pride surged, connecting youth from New York to Paris to Lagos. It was more than finance. It was identity, dignity, and possibility. The new narrative. Burkina Faso's journey proves African nations can rely on themselves. Debt doesn't have to mean dependence. Bold, disciplined leadership can transform a nation and inspire a continent. The story of Burkina Faso isn't just numbers or policy. It's a symbol of hope, courage, and self-determination. Traoré's words echo across Africa. We do not ask for permission to be free. We rise and claim our freedom. Haha, that's powerful. That's iconic. Call to action/closing. If Burkina Faso's bold stand inspires you, share this story. Amplify the truth beyond headlines. Subscribe to follow more stories of African resilience, leadership, and hope. Together, we can celebrate a future where Africa doesn't bow, it leads. God bless Burkina Faso. God bless Africa. And that's a wrap. From debt-laden nation to a symbol of African self-reliance, the journey of Burkina Faso is a story the world can no longer ignore.